Hello,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Just give me a minute. Let me put this caption on because I'm really bad at all of this and I
Me
struggle
too.
every single time.
Okay.
But just
I'm trying.
just 1 minute.
Okay.
Um,
Let's see.
it always gets to be. No, I still got it wrong. AFRO, right?
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
right. I got it right.
languages.
Fine. Okay, I've done the work I'm supposed to do, and I can be like free and talk to you. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? I'm well.
I am so overwhelmed and excited and moved that I'm here talking to you today because, and I will talk a lot about your book, but that book has made so much of a difference to me in my life and
Oh,
in my own
wow.
personal journey. It's yeah, when I saw your name there, I said, yes, please. Oh, universe, thank you. You know? Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a
Oh,
very, very special conversation for me. Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you so much.
oh, thank you. And it means so much to me that you've read the anthology, the collection of writings by, 40 incredible and courageous survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Of course, I am one, but just the voices of so many. So thank it really, particularly because we're having this transcontinental conversation. It's just a reminder of that childhood sexual abuse is a global pandemic. I mean, we all understand about COVID, and it is definitely ravaging our lives, but childhood sexual abuses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to, before we go on and I give all your formal introduction, I just want to personally say thank you so much for putting that one word over there after every interval, which is breathe.
Mm.
Because when I was reading it, I initially really reacted badly to that word because it would make
Mm.
me like really angry at times, or at times that word made me just lose the steam to read on further. And then slowly I got into the rhythm because it just made me go into my own rabbit hole of my own survival, my own experience, and everything else
Mm.
that I've been working with. And then slowly I got into the rhythm of breathe. And it's such an important word because that's what we forget. We forget to breathe. And
Yes.
for me, this conversation here with you is just that, a conversation that's going to make us breathe. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. For me, I don't know where I would. I mean, we all need our breath to live, but just the intentional and conscious breath, my own practice, my meditation practice, it's
Yes.
been so grounding. It's been an anchor. In fact, this morning I was sitting meditating for 90 minutes. So it's just how and I felt called to do that because the test, and I did it every 5 chapters to just invite people to, to take a
Yeah.
breath.
Yeah. We forget that. It's so important. So I'm going to very quickly give a formal introduction for you,
Okay.
Aisha, because this talk hopefully should be taken onto other platforms as well, and I would want everybody to know about the fabulous and amazing work that you've done. So Aisha, just tell me if I say your name correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It's Aisha Shahidah Simmons.
Yes, that's my
Right,
name.
okay, got it, got it. So Aisha Shahidah Simmons' award-winning cultural work expresses its voice through the art of documentary filmmaking, writing, and activism for 27 years. Your work is informed by your lived experiences as a Black feminist lesbian, a childhood sexual abuse survivor, an adult rape survivor, and a 19-year Theravadin Buddhist practitioner. Did I say that right?
Yes, Theravada. Yes, yes.
Aisha is the producer director of the 2006 groundbreaking film No, the Rape Documentary, and editor of the 2020 award-winning anthology Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse.
Mm.
Presently, Aisha is a 2020 Soros Justice Fellow, and I welcome you with a very warm heart to this conversation here today.
Thank you. And I receive your warm welcome and thank you for the invitation.
Aisha, you started our conversation by talking about the meditation that you did before you came here for this. Do you want to talk a little about your practice, how you
Yeah.
went into that, and what it gave you, especially in the context of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I've been practicing Vipassana meditation since 2002. And Vipassana is insight meditation, meaning really seeing things as they are. So I, for 17 years, practiced in the tradition taught by Essen Goenka, and now I've left that tradition, but I'm still practicing Vipassana meditation. And for me, it is it is an opportunity to sit and observe the reality as it is, and really to find to get grounded and centered. And sometimes people, when they hear meditation, it's like, oh, I'm going to meditate and I feel better. And sometimes you don't. It's for me, many times I've been in the fire. And in fact, it is through my meditation practice that the term love with accountability emerged. Because at the time, 6 years ago, I was really engaging chat with my parents who are divorced. I'm 52, so my parents are in their 70s, and they're incredible human rights activists. And they also did not protect me as when I was a child from abuse childhood sexual abuse. I shared this because at the time that I really began to challenge them, they were unwilling, unable to really confront it. And I think that's because of the incredible human rights work that they do in the world. You know, we don't want to think of ourselves as either causing harm or allowing harm
Mm.
to happen, especially if we have dedicated our lives to ending harm. And so when we were at a standstill, and I went to my cushion, my meditation cushion, and just kind of had to work it out by myself on the cushion and really sit, observe, cry. I mean, I went through the whole range of emotions. And in that process, the term love with accountability emerged, because so often, particularly around childhood sexual abuse, love can be used as a weapon. Even though love is a powerful force, it can be, well, if you love us, you wouldn't talk about it. If you love us, you would move on, or all these things. And so I decided, or it came to me, that yes, I love them and I know that they love me, but we also have to talk about love with accountability. And I really credit my meditation practice with that, because it was a place that I could turn to when I really, other than friends and definitely therapy, I didn't have anywhere to turn. I couldn't make them have the conversation. They had to decide that they wanted to, and ultimately they did. But I had to do that work, and it is really in the depths of the silence, of the meditative silence,
Mm.
observing and being with the sensations, that for me, I'm learning bit by bit, not overnight, that liberation comes from within.
So true, so true, and so well said. But you have asked some really critical questions in your book. I mean, and I'm sure. So I just want to get, before I go jump right into the book, I just want to know, how did you kind of put together these people? How did you did they come to you? Did you seek them out? Did the book just invite them in?
I A lot of them, and I see one person who's a contributor, Key Alexander. These are many of them are long-term comrades and friends. And some of them are new and are now my friends and comrades, but they new into my life, and they knew my life. And I reached out, and so it was very much, it wasn't an open call, because at both times with the anthology, well, it started out as an online forum on the feministwire.com, which is a feminist online publication. And so I invited about 25 diasporic Black people to write about childhood sexual abuse, and accountability. And so I invited people to share their stories if they're survivors, because everyone is not a survivor of childhood sexual abuse who contributed to the anthology or to the forum. And then I also asked them to please envision, how can we disrupt and end this without relying on the criminal justice system. I don't know the criminal justice system in India. So I don't even want to, be what I observe a lot of USians can do, kind of like project our reality onto a global reality, and that's just ridiculous. So in the US, I definitely know that, I think anywhere, prisons do not stop harm, did not stop sexual harm. And we often focus on the one person. Like, so my grandfather's the person who caused me harm, who molested me. So we can focus on him and like, oh, what are we going to do with him? But in my instance, I told my parents. So my parents, they didn't take me out of the situation. So yes, what my grandfather did to me was wrong, but so my parents. And so when we talk about incarceration, and we think about all of the people involved in allowing it to happen, either indirectly or directly, we would be locking up a lot of people, not just the person who committed the harm, but the people who enabled it. And that is just like, that is ridiculous. I mean, that's just, to me, we will end up with a small handful of people outside of cages. And also, usually at least in the US, I know for certain, there isn't really conversations about rehabilitation, around accountability. So it becomes a punitive act, and not really about how do we restore, and not so much, I'm not putting the onus on the survivor to like have a relationship with the harm doer, but it's just kind of like, how do we really look at all of the ways in which we allow the harm to happen. I mean, there are many instances happening in the US, and I'm certain in India, where, high officials in political office or entertainers are, we're learning that they've caused harm, and, we're like, oh, let's fire them, let's get rid of them. Okay, maybe they should no longer have their jobs. I'm not saying that, but we don't look at all of the people involved who are looking the other way or who are excusing it. And so for me, that is what I believe many of the contributors in the anthology are really looking at, that they share those who are survivors, they share their stories of the trauma that they experienced. And then they take it a step further to envision what we can do to disrupt it and also to end it, and how we can do it in a way that maybe generations that we may not even have access to in our lifetime will be able to look back and say, wow, people used to do that to children, to adults, that we can. So I look at this anthology as hopefully like a gift to the future of saying, this is what we used to do, and now you all don't do it anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. And when I was reading that, it was obviously the stories. So when you talk about India and the US, we are not far behind. 1 in 2 is a survivor here as per the research that we have over here. So we are looking at generations and generations of people who are living with this suppressed, unaddressed trauma and living fractured silences. Absolutely. So and also the solutions that we're looking at over here have mostly been about carceral punishment and focusing on the individual and not really the complicity of the community, which is actually allowing it to happen. And that is the project that we are engaged with right now, because we say, if 90% of it is happening within the families and the communities, how can we actually make the families wake up or get strengthened or create spaces where people can speak over there, and that's the project that Sakshi is currently engaged with after about almost 3 decades of our work over here, where we're working with we aspire to work with about 4 million families, 4 million youth, to reach out, to just equip them and educate them on, all these preventive practices, and just learning to be alert and aware, just knowing how to de-escalate situations of violence, how do you actually secure children and yourself, how do you have the language to articulate it, how do you enroll allies and build allies within the family. So yes, I completely hear what you're saying, and that's what we are trying to do over here as well, in our own way. And yes, when I was reading the book, all these words, when I read community accountability, and I read transformative and restorative justice, the collective and the individual, reparations, so to speak, um, it's difficult, isn't it, when we kind of actually want to bring them into practice within the families, as I also read from your accounts within your anthology. But do you want to talk a little more about the difficulties of actually bringing this compassion and forgiveness into practice when we're talking about abuse with the abuser that we have to interact with on almost like a daily basis without anybody taking accountability for it?
Yeah, and I point to my sibling Key Alexander's chapter where he really writes about, and he's not a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, but does work on transformative justice work, and he really breaks it down. Many people do, but in just particularly as a transformative justice practitioner, around the ways in which the terms that we learn around like discipline, in response to like what we do, how we raise children. And so I think in so many ways, there's so much crime and punishment, and crime can be like, as a kid, like, I don't know, taking a cookie out of the cookie jar, to like huge forms of crime. So I think that we don't so often we don't offer compassion and grace to ourselves. And so it makes it almost impossible to offer compassion and grace, even to, and I'm talking about to those who cause harm. Again, I want to be really clear that I don't think the work or the onus or the responsibility is on the survivor to handle that work. It is really important that survivors have the space to heal, to recover, to restore. If they want to engage and do restorative work with the harm doer, great. But if they don't want to, that's also great. So I don't think that there has to be a forced engagement. So I think that I think what happens is that we live in a binary. It's like either you're going to be on the side of the survivor, or you're going to be on the side of the harm doer and excuse the harm. And I think that we need all hands on deck, that we need people who are working, supporting, nurturing the survivor, and the harm doers need help because they've caused harm. And I don't believe that we arrive when we come out of our mother's wombs. I don't believe that we arrive as harm doers. I don't think we come to the planet as harm doers. I think that there are many life situations and circumstances that result in that. And I think that that has to be unpacked. Again, never at the expense of the immediate survivor. But I think that if we don't begin to unpack that, then we just allow the violence to continue intergenerationally. And so I think that it's also important that if we could all recognize that all of us are capable of causing harm. Harm is on a spectrum. So, from, lying or gossiping to murder, it's a huge spectrum. But I think that if we can start seeing people as people, particularly harm doers, as humans who are committing monstrous acts, rather than calling them a monster, just saying that these acts are reprehensible and they're monstrous, and beginning to see their humanity enough in the belief that they can change if they want to change with the support. And I think that this is why I talk about needing all hands on deck, so that there are people, and I think that there are people equipped to do that work with the harm doers, just as there are people, like I'm called as a survivor to do the work with survivors. That's what the work that I want to do. But I don't want to discard the harm doer. It's just that that's where my focus is. And then in the family, we have to be willing to talk about these issues. And I think so often it's caught up with economics in terms of, what do you do if the harm doer is the person who's bringing all of the money home, or very responsible? What do we do with that? And I'm saying, if the harm doer is male or female, we know that women also cause harm to children. And so we also have to address that as well, and really dealing with those complexities. And I think this is part of the reason, there are many reasons why I am not in favor of carceral justice or prisons, is because I think that so often we deny what's happening because we're like, oh, I don't want them to go to jail. And what would it look like if we knew they weren't going to jail? Then could we talk about it more, and have real conversations around that? So I think that a lot of times the response is in protection of keeping the person from going to jail, or keeping the children from being removed from the home. A lot of times children don't want to be necessarily separated from their parents. They just want, or whoever's the harm doer, they just want the harm to stop. And so what would that look like? And I think that these questions require time, and they require money. And even though in the US, the prison industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, we're not willing to invest those kinds of funds into healing and restoration and accountability.
And isn't that sad?
Yes.
Isn't that so very sad? Yeah, exactly. That's the struggle we have. I can't believe it. I mean, that's exactly the kind of struggle we have right here, because when we talk about prevention and we talk about, okay, let's talk about what is it that we can do to, create that world that you're talking about, where this was not, and prison is not the answer. We get like what they say, a literal translation from Hindi to English was, nothing has happened as yet, right? So what do you want us to give money for? We'll give money when something has happened and then we need to do the redress. But nothing's really happened as yet, is it? And that's not the world we want, do we?
No.
That's the world we are living in, and that's not the world. But it just seems sometimes, it does seem like a very, very uphill task, right? Of creating.
It does feel like that.
Yeah. And I just want to bring it a little back into the personal space as well. I just want us to, because you had a very strong and powerful journey in how, if I have your permission to, because I can, please. Just from moving, how your parents, the journey of your parents really, which is so powerful, right?
Yeah.
Journey of your parents, that's made me cry a lot, because not everybody is able to take that journey, and again, we understand the pain and how difficult it must have been to do that, and we see it around us when we're trying to work with the people. If you could just talk a little more about that journey that you took with your parents, and what role did you play, or just so that it kind of becomes like a map for some people who are struggling.
Yeah. Well, and I won't go into details. I'll just speak in terms of the abuse, but my grandfather abused me from the ages of 10 to 12. And my parents, who are divorced, they are human rights activists who have really dedicated their lives to defending human rights in this country and internationally. At the time that the abuse occurred, both of my parents were traveling a lot. And as I said, they've been separated for a divorce for a long time. And my grandparents they took care of me. And I told what happened at 10, and I was not believed. And I was not removed from the situation. There was no accountability, nothing. So then I had to figure it out as a 10-year-old. Let me be very clear, figure it out. And it stopped when I was 12, but I didn't receive an announcement. This is hindsight. So it's not like Pop one day said, this is the last time I'm going to molest you. It's when I look back, I realized that it stopped. So I spent from 10 until, throughout my teens, always wondering, is he going to come in the room? What's going to happen? Always having that psychic fear. And yet going there, spending holidays, everything and I loved him, and I loved my grandmother. I mean, so it's a complicated thing. And I had to wear a mask. I was taught to wear a mask. I was taught to lie. One of the contributors, Ignacio Rivera, talks about how we teach children, specifically survivors, to lie. And so we tell kids on the one hand, don't lie. But if I said I was being harmed, they didn't address it. So then I have to pretend that nothing is wrong when everything is wrong. So that, and then my grandmother developed Alzheimer's, and my grandfather took care of her for 10 years selflessly. When he retired, they were going to move and live a retired life, I guess maybe in Florida in the US. And that didn't happen because she had Alzheimer's. And so he took care of her around the clock. And if it wasn't for him, Nana probably would have been in a nursing home. And so this is that duality, right? Here's the person who terrorized me for 2 years, and here's the person who took care of his wife selflessly for 10 years. In terms of like, we always want to kind of like, if you did one bad thing, you're horrible. And it's not. I mean, it is horrible what he did to me, but it's a complex situation. So and then when my grandmother died, I delivered the eulogy at the funeral. And I paid tribute to him for Pop for what he did for his wife and for the family. So even that contradiction, holding all of that, like knowing that this is the man who, as we say, took the night away from me, and at the same time was the hero who took care of my grandmother. So fast forward many years later, when my grandfather became very ill, from a fall, and I'm not a doctor or anything, but I just was a first responder and played a role in saving his life at that time. And everything just kind of came to a head. And I told my parents, my father specifically, because it's his family, no more. And that began a journey of unraveling, of trying to deal with my abuse. My grandfather died a year later from that. I didn't go to the funeral. But I was still grappling, because I initially was only focused on what Pop did. I didn't think about my parents. And it wasn't until 2015. So I was molested in 1979. So from 79 to 81. So 2015. And I share that to say, to really encourage survivors to be patient with themselves in terms of the process and the journey. Because by 2015, I had already made a film about sexual violence and healing. My parents are in that film. And we were not talking about abuse, childhood sexual abuse. So it wasn't until 2015 that it came to me, oh my God, they played a role in my harm. They were bystanders. And that's, as I already shared earlier, about love with accountability. And I was like, we have to talk about this. And initially they didn't want to talk about it, because from their point of view was that it had been dealt with, like, because they had acknowledged, when I became an adult, that I had been harmed, I was abused, but they didn't really see their role in how they allowed it to happen. And it was not, I guess, a year afterwards that my mother was the first person to really come to grips with. She was like, oh my God, we did not remove you from the situation. We not only let you stay there, we were going there to act as if everything was okay. And so she asked if she could write for the Love with Accountability online forum. And then she wrote in that same piece that she wrote in the forum is in the anthology, where she writes about how she did not protect me. And my mother is an Islamic scholar, a feminist, a Muslim, but just a radical feminist, and who has, in my film, talks about the sexual abuse that she experienced of fighting for racial justice in this country. So she talks about, here she is, fighting for women's rights, and yet she didn't protect her daughter. And last year, the three of us, my parents, on a Zoom call, we really did healing work. And because I did work alone with my mom, and then with my dad, we did a lot of work, and he has a son, my brother, the three of us did a lot of work around, just harm that we experienced as children in the midst of so much. I mean, my parents, in the midst of so much of love and celebration, but there was also harm. So last year, the three of us talked, and I feel really fortunate that I received the accountability, the acknowledgement, the apology that I've been wanting for so long. And I'm also aware that many people will probably never get that. And so I have to say that while that journey was powerful and healing for me, I started, independent of them, taking steps to just be like, my healing can't be contingent on my parents' understanding. that because if not, I'll never be well. So I had to, like, that doesn't mean I didn't still keep pushing with them to hopefully see what, the harm that they did to me as a child. But I also had to focus on my own healing journey independent of them. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful that my mother has written about it, that she talks about it publicly. I'm grateful that my father has, come to grips with it as well. And so I feel fortunate, and it's still a process. I don't, it's still, things still come up. We still have to talk about it. So it's not like we had this conversation and it's forever done. It marked my life forever, and it's marked our relationships. But what I'll say is that we are committed to doing the healing work privately and then also publicly.
Beautiful, beautiful. This is a story of courage. This is a story of vulnerability, and this is a story of love, and really love with accountability, as you say about that, because yes, it is as difficult for the parent or the adult or the primary caregiver to accept that they were complicit through either denial or silence or whatever, as it is difficult for the survivor to speak about it with the people that they love so much. And that's a big, huge challenge that, or a chasm that one has to actually overcome and find ways. And something really important and powerful that you said just now, Aisha, is that it cannot be contingent on this. The healing has to be something that you take responsibility for, and move within that. And so, as it is an individual process, but has a collective or a community of survivors, or the telling of the story, I mean, what are the various ways of healing that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, well, I was in a 4-year fellowship, the Just Beginnings Collaborative Fellowship of predominantly survivors of color, as we say in the United States. So meaning, Black and Asian and Latinx and Native American, as well as white survivors. That we were a small cohort of, I think like 20 or so of us. So for 4 years, we were together doing the work. All of us are many survivors, and then we had our own projects. So my project was Love with Accountability. There's a project called Mirror Memoirs, the Heal Project, I Am Negrix, and many Girls for Gender Equity. So the Firecracker Foundation, many organizations where we really shared about our journeys and created our own projects that work together. We were in tandem. There's an organization called the Children of Kambihi, looking at how the church has played a role in both allowing, condoning sexual violence, but also has been a refuge for people. Looking at the importance of, with the Heal Project, really talking about how the way to prevent childhood sexual abuse is a comprehensive sex education from the cradle to the grave. This notion of not talking about sex, not keeping it a secret, really plays a role in disempowering everyone involved. And then they're my community of survivor friends and activists. I don't know where I would be without them. I've been in therapy, since 1992. So working with a therapist has been really instrumental. I already shared about my meditation practice. So there are many, for me, it's the community, it's a spiritual practice for myself. It's the mental work, it's the somatic work with the body. Because, childhood sexual abuse, particularly, any form, and I've also been raped as an adult, any form of violation, because this is what it's an invasion of our bodies. And then as children, our psyches, we're not even formed mentally and emotionally, we're in formation. So this stuff impacts us on cellular levels. So we have to the extent that we're able, work on mind, body, and spirit, to really heal and recognizing that healing, it's not a destination. It is perhaps a lifelong journey. I still get triggered. I'm 52. This happened to me when I was 10, and then when I was raped at 19. I still get triggered. What the shift is that I have resources in the form of community, in a form of a practice, spiritual practice, in a form of therapy. So I have places that I can turn to, the resources. And so that's what I think that this work is about for me, and hopefully encouraging others to like, let's create the toolbox. So it's not so much that you may, that you'll live a life without trauma or without triggers. Some people are fortunate and that's the case, but most of us are not. So do we have the toolbox so that when, for instance, if the pipe breaks, right, then we call the plumber. So what's the toolbox that we can call upon to help us when something unexpected ignites us, or where depression comes over us? What are the resources that we have? And I think that and that's where, community comes in, because I know therapy. I'm fortunate that I've worked with therapists who worked with my bank account, because there have been many times when I was a serious struggling artist. And so I know, at least in the US, therapy can be quite expensive. Fortunately, there are spaces where there's healing circles. There are places where people can receive support that is not solely contingent on what's in one's bank account. So I think that for me is, I'm glad that you asked that question, talking about that healing process, because I believe in healing in community, because when we heal in community, then the community is healed, and hopefully we can create environments where we can stop this at some generation.
Yeah, two things that stand for me very powerfully from the anthology that is there is one in which Dr. Kai Green talks about, I have acted like a monster, but I'm not a monster, or I have
Yes.
harmed, but I'm not harmed. Very, very powerful. And
Yes.
then another thing that Loretta, I think, said about
Loretta Ross. Yes.
yeah, the deep sadness of immense grief is different from despair, and every telling has helped her uh, address or deal with this deep sadness of grieving that she has inside her. And I think
Yes.
that really stayed with me as extremely powerful things. And if we are
Yeah.
actually building this community of healing together, it's as much for the people who've been through the abuse as for those who probably have been the abusers as such. Would you say that?
I would. I would. Yes, I think that we need that. I mean, because we're all, Earth is our only home that we know of, right? And we all have to live here. And so I'm really interested in how can we change people's behavior? That's what I
Yes.
want. I want to, what is the work that we can do to, to stop the harm? And that's why I shared about my grandfather. Like, yes, he did these monstrous acts, and the same man took care of his wife selflessly. So it's like, so what happened that he did that? And I wish I never had the strength, courage, fortitude, I don't know, to engage with him about that. I wish I did, because he for a long time lived, and I spent time with him, and I enjoyed my time with him as an adult. And I also, in the back of my mind, knew that these things that he committed harm, but I didn't know how to approach it. Now that I wish I knew then what I know now, because I would venture there if and so I'm glad that you lifted Kai's words, and they go by the name Marshall's words up around, around, I'm not a monster. I've committed monstrous acts. And then again, if we can think about the harm that we've all caused at some level, and because we always think of harm, and that's why I say harm, like the extremes. I think of rape, childhood sexual abuse, murder. Those are extremes, but there's like the little harms versions of harm that we cause. And I think when we start to see that and recognize, then we can just, be like, there's a line in my film, No, the rape documentary, where one of the survivors, Janelle White, she says that her one of when she was raped, one of her friends who knew her and the rapist, who was a man, went to the man and said, I've learned the behaviors too. I did not act on those behaviors. And he's like, so I'm not going to let you go. We're going to talk about why you did this behavior. And I think that that's so important, because we all learn a lot of behaviors. Now, some of us act on them. Hopefully more of us do not. But we have to really kind of look at that. But again, I think not at the expense, and I credit one of the authors, contributors, Cecilia Falls, where she really encourages us to, like, let's not lose sight of the survivors. Because I think sometimes in our quest to, like, abolish the prisons and stop carceral justice, that we forget about the survivors. And I think it's really important to also remember that people have been harmed and they're nursing their wounds and they're dealing with their wounds. So it should never be at the expense of the survivors.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there is this very powerful thing, in again from your anthology, which is talking about. Can I just read out an excerpt from
Yes,
there?
please, please.
Because this is Lynn Roberts, and this really stayed. It is beautiful. Yeah, there it is. Maybe you can read it out. The one which is about the beauty and promise of approaching child sexual abuse is preventable, and as a family and community crisis, rather than as a secret or crime when it does happen, is that it allows us to see and embrace each person involved as wounded and in need of our support and guidance, rather than our judgment and punishment. When this support is provided with love and accountability, then we, each one of us, is also more capable of healing from our hurt, reconciling our anger, and further evolving as human beings. I mean, that's
from Lynn. Yes.
That's what you're really saying here again, and that's so important. And we lose sight of this all the time. We're always just kind of hankering for lynching people and putting them behind bars and removing them from our sight, so that we don't have to take responsibility for what really is happening around us.
Yeah. I think it's so true, and that we don't. I think we don't think about the whole, the family, the community, and that it takes all of us. It takes all of us to really heal, and to protect the children, to really creating safe spaces for children so that they can thrive and live their fullest lives without knowing harm, because because a lot of times we replicate what we see. I hear stories of children causing sexual harm to other children, and the immediate response is to, like, the child who's caused the harm, to, like, really punish them, or and I'm just like, wait, where did this child learn this behavior? Where did they see it? That we don't. And I think that that's the thing, we have to be willing to, like, keep kind of going back and looking and having those they're really hard and painful realizations. I think that that's how trauma happens intergenerationally as well, that there's stories of generations of people being harmed by the same uncle because no one's talking about it,
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
So you tell your stories through documentaries and films. Yeah. How do you frame the personal histories? Like, what are the choices that you make when you're there as?
Well, for me, my goal with No, the rape documentary, and with Love with Accountability, which is not a film, is really for the survivors to tell their stories. So when I filmed No, I with the survivors, I asked them to tell their stories. So even and there are many stories in No, and it's very intentional where people participated in one form of sexual activity but said no to another form, or they were assaulted by their boyfriend or their leader in a movement. There was always some kind of close connection. And a lot of them were silent because of the impact of white supremacy and racism in this country and the carceral system. No one wants to call the police, understandably. I'm not advocating for that at all. And so, again, this is what we come to, that community accountability, community responsibility. And so for me, it was really important for the survivors to tell their stories. So I was not cross-examining them. I believed that they were raped or assaulted. So I didn't need to prove anything. I just asked them to tell their stories. And for several of them, they were like, that was the first time when they could just tell their stories without being kind of cross-examined. And then with their testimonies, I thought it was important, particularly, again, speaking in a United States context, to frame the stories in the context of U.S. history in this country, in its treatment of African Americans. So really looking at enslavement of African people, the lynchings that were happening at the turn of the 20th century, the civil rights and Black Power movements, the Black feminism, and part of the reason is because when survivors come forward, particularly survivors in marginalized communities, when our whole communities are under attack, we are viewed as traitors to the community. And so for me, it was really important to lay down a foundation of really demonstrating how Black women, Black cisgender women, have been at the forefronts of movements for radical and revolutionary change in this country, even while being sexually assaulted. So to really push up against the narrative that to come forward about sexual violence is because you don't care about the community. And I, for me, believe that to come forward about sexual violence is precisely because we care about the community, that we want to deal with the harm that is happening, to really kind of excavate the harm and address it so that we can heal and really be a healthy community working together for the eradication of other forms of oppression in this country. But again, it was really centering the voices of Black women survivors. I started working on the film in 1994. It took me 12 years to make the film. It had its world premiere in 2006 at the Pan-African Film Festival. And it actually won an award. And there was a film festival in India Women's Film Festival. It won an audience award. I didn't get to go to the festival, but I was very happy. The film has had a very wide international audience, as well as definitely U.S. audience. And I share this because it's, as just us having this conversation, again, speaks to the universality of sexual violence, that, you don't have to be from a specific country, speak a certain language, be from a culture to understand sexual violence if you've experienced it. And that for me was an eye opener when I was making No. It took so long. I received so much resistance. It was 1994 is not 2021. I mean, we don't really want to talk about sexual violence now, but we weren't talking about it in 1994. And so, I was in my early 20s and trying to make this film. And so as a result of that struggle, I had the opportunity to travel internationally because feminist activists in Europe, specifically throughout Europe, and when people hear Europe, they're only thinking Europeans. But as we know, because of forced migration, I'm talking about African Caribbean communities, South Asian communities, Arab communities, that these women were organizing screenings of the work in progress. They were doing simultaneous translation of the work in progress to raise awareness in their communities around sexual violence. And for me, that was such a profound experience, as a, to recognize experientially the global reality of rape, to have survivors come to me and say, this is my story. And they would say this through translation, through interpreters, and just recognizing. So it was very powerful for me to be able to to capture the stories. I'm for eternally grateful to all of the contributors to know and to love with accountability, because the works, we write our work, we put the book down, or we film the documentary, but for other people, they're encountering it for the first time. So for me, it is a deep bow of gratitude that folks are willing to have their stories told over and over again towards healing and accountability.
Yeah, and it's also giving a lot of courage and, if I may say so, like a roadmap to others who are struggling in silos and are kind of just trapped in silences, and don't have the community around them or the support structure around them, for them to be able to access works like these and then get the courage to say, hey, you know what? It's not as if if this is something to celebrate, that is, I'm not alone, but just get courage from the fact that I really am not alone, and I can speak about it without being ostracized or marginalized further.
And I would know, the powerful thing for me is that people translated it, it's subtitled in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. And that was really a testament to those communities really wanting it to be accessible in their mother tongues. And then once COVID happened, I made it available for a US dollar online for viewing, so people could be able to access it and use it. And then there's a 100-page study guide that people can use to accompany the film in terms of talking about the issues and as it relates to their own realities, so using the example, the testimonies and realities and but applying it to their own lives in reality.
Lovely. I mean, I'm definitely going to access that and have a look at it. Are you working on any other project as such right now?
I am now, with my fellowship with Soros, I'm working on my third project. Like I view this as a trilogy of work. So first it was No, the rape documentary, and then it was Love with Accountability. So these are, for me, documenting the voices of others. And this last project is going to be in my voice completely, using storytelling to disrupt and heal and disrupt sexual violence. So it's really looking at my life story, but beyond just my life, really looking at the contradictions and complexities that allow the harm to continue. So it's harder because this is really solo, as opposed to the other projects I was working in community. But I feel like that I'm now ready, particularly after having done so much work, personal work with my family, as well as the other two works, to delve deep, and then that will close the chapter of the trilogy of works.
Wow, I wish you a lot of strength, a lot of courage, a lot of vulnerability, and a lot of power to complete this work.
Thank you so much.
All of that. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
There's so much more that I want to talk to you about, but I think we are running out of time over here.
Yes.
So there's something that I love asking everybody I speak with. And I know you, so if you were not to use the words activist or documentary filmmaker or survivor for yourself, what would be the 3 words that you would choose today that would capture the essence of who Aisha is?
3 words. So you said if I didn't use what were the words if I didn't use survivor, documentary filmmaker, or what?
Activist. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know I would say cultural worker and seeker. I think those are the 3. Cultural worker is a term I learned from my teacher, the late Black feminist writer Toni K. Bambara. And so really creating and using culture in terms of my work, creating work, and so it's embodying the words that you said I shouldn't use. But for me, I think I'm really more and more, I mean, I've always said I was a culture worker, but I always say, I'm a culture worker, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a writer. But I feel like cultural worker embraces all of that. And then seeker. I'm striving to be a seeker of truth, my own truth, and external truth. That for me is really and truth is so complex. I mean, it's not, but it's so complex. And so just really seeking that. But seeker, I think, is one that's beginning to resonate with me more and more the older I get.
Beautiful. Lovely. Yeah, I resonate a lot with seeker as well myself personally. And yes, my personal relationship with truth is as complex as that, because my truth also rests on lies, and my lies hide my truth. So it's such a complex cycle
Yes,
per se.
exactly. That's what I said. Yeah, exactly. Because that's the truth it changes, right?
Yes,
It does change. It's
yeah,
not this finite thing.
no, it isn't. Yeah.
As our awareness deepens, because I mean it's something that my mother and I and my father and I have talked about, what was true for them then and not
Yeah.
now. And I think it is truly a gift of aging. So many people don't want to age, but I'm like, no, it's through that you learn. I learned so much. So
Mm,
that's seeking. So
mm.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean,
This is lovely.
I
My
know it
gosh.
was really, really beautiful to talk to you. Somehow, I'm just going back very enriched and filled with hope and courage, because your voice is very, very critical, has played a critical role in my own personal journey, as well as the work that we are doing. And I do hope that we can stay in touch and we can
Yes.
seek more from you, and maybe offer some to you from what we have here,
I
and come
love that.
together in more ways. This has
Yes.
really been an amazing, amazing conversation for me, Aisha. Thank you so much,
Thank
really.
you. Thank you. And I hope one day we will be able to meet in person. I hope to be able
Yes,
to
yes,
return. I've been to India. I would love to return at, a
yes,
time when it is safe for all of us and for you to come here.
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely, absolutely.
Thank
So
you.
I will just do a formal closing for it, because it's required of me. So give me a minute for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. This is
um,
my first Instagram live, so thank you.
Uh, with 1 in 2 survivors of child sexual abuse in India, we have a lot of work to do. Regardless of the number of laws and redressal systems that we have, change would take place only if we shift mindsets. Love with accountability. Easier said than lived. As Dr. Daniel R. Moss has said in your book, Aisha, survivors must love themselves unconditionally, courageously, and entirely because of who they are, and because of or in spite of what they have endured. Since we hope to be continuing this conversation, I just want to quickly share with you that the Rakshin Project by Sakshi, under the direction of the Ministry of Youth Affairs, is working with NSS units, National Service Scheme units, all across the country to equip 4 million youth to be preventers of child sexual abuse.
Wow.
It is time we stepped up into becoming accountable and responsible. So please, everybody, help us in working to skill build Rakshins who can prevent sexual violence in their family and community. 1,000 rupees is all it takes for training one Rakshin to make home a safe space. Join us, support the work, donate to make homes a safe space from child sexual abuse. I thank you all for your time
Thank
and for
you.
listening in to us. And thank you so much, Aisha, once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nita. I know it's nighttime over there. Please rest well.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye bye.
Take care.